The opening to Final Fantasy VIII lives rent-free in my head. This is such a visually striking sequence full of symbolism and set to one of Nobuo Uematsu's finest compositions, which says a lot for a man with this stacked of a portfolio. Final Fantasy VIII always had both the privilege and the misfortune of following Final Fantasy VII, one of the most critically lauded video games of its generation. While the game still sold incredibly well on the PlayStation and saw its fair share of critical acclaim, it feels like nowadays nobody really talks about Final Fantasy VIII in comparison to VII. Whether that's due to the qualities of the games themselves, or if Square's ongoing Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy is primarily responsible, I'm not sure. But as someone who played both games for the first time over 20 years after their release, I think I like Final Fantasy VIII better, and I want to show it some love. For its time, Final Fantasy VIII was a visually stunning game. This is achieved primarily through the use of static backgrounds, essentially images that you are able to walk around and interact with, rather than a freely moving camera. I really enjoy this visual style. It feels like every shot is essentially a painting. The animations are lively, characters have all sorts of little situational gestures and body language to reflect how they feel. I really appreciate the shift to more normally proportioned human characters from Final Fantasy VII's bobbleheads in the overworld. It fits the game's tone much better. The user interface is clean and minimalist, never taking up more space than it absolutely needs to. I've been showing original PlayStation 1 Final Fantasy VIII up until this point, but the game has a remaster on current consoles that redoes most of the character models, which is both nice and a bit jarring to see contrasted against the original backgrounds. But graphics are only half of the game's overall presentation. Holy fucking shit, this game has good music. Nobuo Uematsu has solidified himself as one of my favorite video game composers, period. This soundtrack just takes you through so many moods. Catchy and atmospheric, tragic and triumphant. The only way I feel I can do the soundtrack justice is simply to let you hear it. Don't get me wrong, this whole video could be about the soundtrack to this game, but I want to give special mention to the final boss theme, fittingly called The Extreme, for bringing back the old Final Fantasy leitmotif during its euphoric crescendo. Final Fantasy VIII's core cast of 6 playable characters do a great job as protagonists. Squall is the leader, but arguably has the greatest amount of growing to do as a person. Operating under the belief that everyone in this world needs to look out for themselves, Squall starts the game as a standoffish asshole who has no interest in forming connections with others whatsoever. He's a highly competent mercenary, but not much else. Eventually he meets Rinoa, first at the dance to celebrate his graduation from mercenary school, then as a client for his first major job. Rinoa is warm, open, and emotional, and their budding relationship is one of the core pillars of Final Fantasy VIII's story. Not only does Rinoa push Squall out of his comfort zone, she frequently challenges him on his jerkish behavior, directly facilitating his character development. Keistis is Squall's instructor, despite only being a year older than him. Highly intelligent and beloved by most of her students, she conceals her insecurities and does her best to act as the group's advisor due to her greater degree of experience. Zell is a mercenary in Squall's graduating class. Brash and hot-headed, his tendency to act before thinking gets the party into some really big trouble early on. But deep down, he's a good guy who just wants to do a good job. He also has a great moment when the group fails an assassination attempt and gets thrown into prison. Everyone else is without their weapon, but since Zell is a martial artist and doesn't rely on weaponry, he is instrumental in breaking them out. Irvine is a confident, cocky sharpshooter with a flair for the romantic. At least, that's how he presents himself. It's all just a facade, however, as the pressure of his job really gets to him. Selphie likes trains, parties, and blowing stuff up. She's a welcome change of pace from everyone else's deeply rooted insecurities and childhood trauma, yet she does still face her own struggles. Cypher is Squall's rival, which is established as soon as the game begins. He's cocky, disregards orders, holds his gunblade like a dumbass, and is just overall unpleasant to everyone around him, especially Zell. He and Squall parallel each other in many ways. They both use the same type of weapon, they both have a hard time getting along with others, they both even give each other matching scars in the game's opening. But whereas Squall eventually grows out of his emotional immaturity thanks to the people around him, Cypher only falls deeper and deeper into his own delusions of grandeur as the game progresses. Everyone in the main party, aside from Rinoa, is a seed, essentially the in-universe term for mercenaries. They were raised from a young age to become ideal mercenaries at a fancy boarding school, appropriately titled Garden. Once Squall, Selphie, and Zell graduate and fully become seeds, they are sent on a mission to assist a group of revolutionaries led by Rinoa, fighting against the imperialist nation of Galbadia. Control of Galbadia is soon thereafter passed from the president to the sorceress Idea, who murders the president in front of everyone and declares that a new reign of terror shall begin. The story has plenty of underlying moving parts that are revealed over the course of the game: the true purpose of Garden and Seed, what is driving the sorceress Idea, the main playable cast's shared background, and I'd really rather not spoil all the ins and outs for anyone who wants to play the game themselves. At various points in the game, members of the main party fall into a magically induced coma where they relive events from years ago from the perspective of a few Galbadian soldiers: Laguna, Kiros, and Ward. These sequences are some of my favorites in the entire game, due in large part to Laguna's unique battle theme, titled The Man with the Machine Gun. I also just love it when a game offers this sort of dual narrative and disrupts its own status quo. Laguna is the polar opposite of Squall. He's a passionate, romantically awkward goofball who often gets Kiros and Ward into all sorts of trouble. After their first visit to what they call the Dream World, Squall even remarks that he dreamt he was a moron. The character writing in this game is just phenomenal. Even without voice acting, it's so easy to pick various quotes out of context and know exactly who said them. These dream sections also do a lot to fill in the player about the world of Final Fantasy VIII. As Laguna, you get previews of places that Squall will eventually travel to, and you can piece together how the world has changed in the years between both protagonists' adventures. It's really cool. Final Fantasy VIII functions as a typical turn-based JRPG, with a few caveats. The main difference is ATB, or the Active Time Battle system, introduced in Final Fantasy IV. Each party member in battle has a meter that fills up over time that determines when you get to act. The enemies also act on their own timing, so unlike, say, Pokemon for instance, you don't get unlimited time when your turn comes around to just sit there and think. You need to be punching in battle commands as quickly as possible when your meter is full. It can be the difference between victory and defeat. I really like this system. It keeps the player way more engaged in each moment of battle. The main gameplay difference between Final Fantasy VIII and other entries in the series is the junction system. In order to use your party to their full potential, you need to junction each member to a Guardian Force, or GF, essentially powerful monsters that will share their strength with you after you defeat them. They grant a variety of bonuses, including new battle commands, improvements to your stats, and even utility outside of battle. The other half of the junction system is the need to draw magic abilities from enemies. You don't have an MP or mana gauge or a predetermined list of magic spells you can use. Instead, in battle, you draw magic out of your enemies and stock a certain amount of uses of that spell. Each enemy has its own unique list of magic that it offers, which I feel goes a long way towards making even regular random encounters feel important for strengthening your party. You can also junction magic spells to various stats, depending on your Guardian Force's abilities. The game will often forcibly swap out your party members during various segments, but you can conveniently exchange all Guardian Force and magic junctions between characters with a few simple button presses. I know a lot of people aren't fans of the junction system and cite it as their biggest critique of the game, but I really like it for its wealth of customization and the feeling that even in the most unremarkable of battles, there's still opportunities to make your party stronger and more versatile. At any point in Final Fantasy VIII, you can approach most NPCs and challenge them to a game of triple Triad, essentially an in-universe trading card game, and honestly, it could be its own entire game. The amount of cards to collect, different rule sets to play with, it's arguably one of the things Final Fantasy VIII is most famous for. It's seriously something else. There was a period of time where I felt truly burnt out on traditional turn-based role-playing games. After witnessing my childhood favorite Pokemon diminish in quality over the last decade and 100%ing Persona 5 Royal, which took like 100 hours, I just couldn't find it in myself to commit to yet another turn-based adventure. But Final Fantasy VIII has revived my interest in the genre, to the point where I've already got Final Fantasy IX downloaded for the moment I feel ready, and from what I hear, I've got nothing but good things to look forward to.